Breaking tonight, the Prime Minister closes out the G7 here in Alberta and sends a message on Ukraine.
Canada's unwavering support for secure, a free and sovereign Ukraine.
Mark Carney promises Ukraine billions in aid, but did Canada get what it needed from this summit? Our correspondents are standing by. And Donald Trump sends a new threat to Tehran as Iran and Israel launch new attacks. And a new warning for people in their 40s about colorectal cancer.
When he said stage 4, my mind went blank.
Is it time to start screening sooner?
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault in Banff, Alberta.
Thanks for joining us here in the beautiful Rockies, where the G7 summit is drawing to a close with a flurry of high-level meetings between Canada's Prime Minister and international leaders. And with a Canadian pledge of support for Ukraine, it includes billions more for military equipment as Ukraine fights back against Russia's invasion, and a loan to help with rebuilding. And with that announcement, a reminder of why it's needed: fresh attacks in Kyiv. So this whole summit has been shaped by war. Russia's in Ukraine, and the one raging right now between Israel and Iran. That one responsible for Donald Trump leaving early. Ashley Burke is here with us now. And Ashley, there's now a second early departure.
Yeah, Adrian, two conflicts have forced two world leaders to go home early. President Zelensky canceled events in Calgary after a major Russian attack in Kyiv, and also the person that he came here to meet in person left early too.
The sign of the maturity, I think, of the G7 that we come together.
A G7 table full of world leaders coming together, but missing a major player, Donald Trump.
I'd like to welcome everyone here to the most important session of these 2 days here in Kananaskis.
The U.S. president long gone before more officials arrived, among them Ukraine's president, who wanted to meet Trump face-to-face to push for tougher sanctions against Russia and for the U.S. to help pressure Moscow into talks.
We're ready for the peace negotiations. We are ready for the peace negotiations, unconditional ceasefire. I think it's very important, but for this we need pressure.
A Russian attack fresh on his mind. Overnight, Moscow hit Kyiv with one of the deadliest attacks in months, killing more than a dozen people and wounding dozens more.
It's a big tragedy for us, and we need support from our allies.
Canada stepped up with more support.
We are providing additional military assistance, drones, helicopters, broader munitions, over $2 billion worth of assistance directly to Ukraine.
As Carney tried to get leaders to agree on a joint statement, he announced more sanctions of his own against Moscow and a $2 billion loan coming from frozen Russian assets. New funding that also helps Canada reach its NATO defense spending target. But Trump wants nations to spend even more.
What they do expect, of course, is for the allies outside the US to step up in terms of defense spending, to equalize with what the US is spending, and we have to do that.
Carney wrapped up his first summit with consensus on some issues.
Good evening, everyone.
But not a key one. No joint statement on Ukraine, but there was some agreement.
We are resolute in pursuing all options to maximize pressure on Russia, including financial sanctions.
Okay, so that is interesting. Ashley, what else do we know at this point about leaders not releasing a joint statement on Ukraine?
Well, Adrian, a lot has changed. Earlier this afternoon, reporters were originally told that there were plans to issue a joint statement, but that the Americans wanted to water down the language when it came to some of the pointed things they wanted to say about Russia. We're now being told that that information was wrong, and a spokesperson from the Prime Minister's office says that there was no plan for a joint statement and that the language that Carney used was what the leaders agreed on when he made his remarks tonight in his statement as the chair of the G7.
Oh, it's also very sensitive. Ashley, the Prime Minister also met with other world leaders, including India's Narendra Modi, and news came of that.
It did. India and Canada both agreed that they were going to put in place new high commissioners. Both of those countries had expelled those senior diplomats last year after the RCMP came out publicly and accused the Modi government of playing a role in a massive campaign of violence on Canadian soil that included murder and extortion.
Okay, Ashley Burke, thank you for all your reporting. There is a lot going on behind the scenes following Donald Trump's early departure. Coming up in the breakdown, we'll take a closer look at the new timeline for Canada's trade deal with the U.S. and whether Mark Carney has been successful at achieving all of Canada's goals. Now, to the reason for Trump's early exit from the G7. He says he left to deal with the war between Israel and Iran. And as Paul Hunter shows us tonight, the world is waiting to see how Trump handles it.
Yet again, sirens and Israel's defense systems in action in the skies above Tel Aviv. In Iran, this from the Israeli Air Force, showing more of Israel's assault on Iran. And these images, said to be more missiles fired from Iran toward Israel.
Remember, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon.
Hours after U.S. President Donald Trump flew back to the White House, leaving the G7 summit in Alberta a day early, underlining his view Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon, he turned to his Truth Social platform to put it forcefully. Unconditional surrender, he wrote. Also posting, he knows where Iran's supreme leader is hiding. We're not going to take him out, kill, at least not for now, wrote Trump. And in another post, he said, we now have complete and total control of the skies over Iran. Trump using the word we, despite, to date, no direct U.S. involvement in the fighting. But as the world wonders, is the U.S. set to now join Israel in that fighting? Word more U.S. fighter jets are moving into the region, and multiple U.S. naval assets, with a number of U.S. military bases in the region now on heightened alert. Meanwhile, Trump and his security team met for more than an hour in the Situation Room. Unlike Israel, the U.S. has the firepower to destroy Iran's nuclear capability if it so chooses. Trump also speaking by telephone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The White House releasing no details. Trump silent on all of it.
Leading to that big question, now what? On that flight from Alberta overnight, Trump was asked what he's looking for out of all this. His answer, a real end, not a ceasefire, an end. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
Next to senior international correspondent Margaret Evans, who is in Jerusalem tonight, and she looks at what the Israeli government wants and what that could mean for Iran.
Israel's war with Iran, no longer hidden in the shadows that once contained it, but out in the open, powerful enough to empty out Tel Aviv's beaches while the threat of Iranian missiles remains. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists the decision to attack Iran will ensure Israel's future. Michael Danilov believes him.
Many of us hope it's the right thing to do.
Israel's military says the aim is to knock out Iran's nuclear capability once and for all. But government ministers here continue to hint at regime change. Defense Minister Israel Katz taunting Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei with the ghost of Saddam Hussein. Remember what happened to the dictator in Iraq, he's saying. Most Israelis consider Iran an existential threat, but not everyone supports orchestrated regime change. Yair Golan is an opposition leader.
We have a very clear mission to diminish the nuclear military capability of Iran. This is the most important issue concerning the existence of Israel.
Is it a distraction then that the Prime Minister keeps mentioning regime change?
I think it's totally unnecessary, but as you know, I do not support this government.
Analysts say Israel shouldn't count on the Iranian people to rise up and help topple their own regime, no matter how much they might loathe its repression.
when you have a missile directed at you and your family? Do you say, yes, please bomb us if this means democracy and a better life?
Rened Mansour is with the London-based think tank Chatham House.
Iraqis were bombed in 2003, and 10, 15 years later, ISIS showed up. So it's not necessarily a better future that bombs produce.
Israel's evacuation orders to residents in Tehran have sparked panic, heightened by an echo from the U.S. President Donald Trump. Israel's strongest ally and the one with the power to shape what remains an uncertain horizon. Margaret Evans, CBC News, Jerusalem.
Medics in the Gaza Strip say at least 51 people were killed, 200 more injured when they were fired on by Israeli forces. This was the scene at Nasser Hospital as the casualties rolled in. Witnesses say people had gathered along a main road hoping to get food from aid trucks. The Israeli military says it is aware of reports of injuries from IDF fire after the crowd's approach and is reviewing the incident. An Alberta Conservative has officially resigned as MP so Pierre Poilievre can run in the riding. Damien Kurek promised to vacate his seat in the riding of Battle River Crowfoot so the Conservative leader could run in a by-election. During the federal election, Poilievre lost the Ottawa area seat he'd held for more than 20 years. A by-election could be held as early as August. Breaking tonight, the Florida Panthers have won the Stanley Cup once again, beating the Edmonton Oilers in the finals and extending Canada's 32-year-long Stanley Cup drought. So let's go to Ian Hannah-Mansing in Edmonton now, where the news is just starting to set in.
Thanks, Adrian. Disappointment here in the Ice District, where fans did not get the show they were hoping for.
The Florida Panthers back-to-back Stanley Cup champions.
The Panthers scored early and they scored often, winning by a final count of 5-1. Florida's second straight Stanley Cup. That, of course, meaning the Oilers have lost in the final in consecutive years. Let's bring in Mark Carney, longtime sportscaster here in Edmonton, radio host, and I think as you know, even by the end of the first period, there were a lot of fans here who still believed the Oilers could turn it around. What happened?
They just made too many mistakes. They were outclassed in almost every aspect of the game. I mean, obviously Florida, you know, double Stanley Cup champion. It's not a fluke. I mean, they're a really, really good team, and you can't make mistakes. And right from the get-go, the Oilers made mistakes that ended up in the back of their net and never seemed to get on track. They felt like they could come back in this series, and you see these goals from the get-go. Marchand scoring. Some of their top players really got on track in the last few games, and the Oilers' top players did not. Connor McDavid was nowhere to be seen in these last couple of games. A lot of mistakes on the defensive side as well, and the Oilers just didn't have it. And they're going to be looking at a lot of changes, I would think, in the offseason to try to close that gap, because Florida looks extremely good. Although you have to remember that both these teams finished well back in the regular season standings. The Oilers were hoping that some of the changes they made in the late going would help them come together and get to where they did not get to last year, where they lost in 7 games. And they did play extremely well all the way through the playoffs, but it felt like here in the final they just didn't have what it took.
I wouldn't normally ask you this about a news story, an election, let's say, or, you know, some other big news story. I will ask you here, because you're not just a longtime Edmonton broadcaster, you're a longtime Edmonton guy.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
It feels like they missed their chance. It feels like Edmonton missed his chance, you know, to break that streak of Canadian teams not winning. And I felt like this was the team that could do it. A lot of people, you know, last year was a big surprise. Everybody was like excited. Oh, they got to there. They stretched to 7. It was kind of a big surprise. Yeah. This year, people had expectations. And even when, Florida comes in and wins game number 5 in Edmonton, people thought, well, the Oilers can come back. But they never really got on track. And so it's almost it's a bigger disappointment this year than it was even last year.
I think you captured the sentiment of so many fans really well. Stand by, Mark. We're going to come back and chat with you for a sec. But speaking of fans, Madeline Cummings is down behind me in what was a very full and raucous Moss Pit. Pretty well empty now, Madeline. There was a big turnout, but of course a tough night for so many of those fans.
It really was. I started to see some fans leaving earlier in the third period, and when Florida scored that final goal, a lot of people decided to just cut their losses and leave then. I walked into a sports bar with a few minutes left to go in the third period, and it was just quiet. Not the atmosphere any of these fans were hoping for tonight. And as Mark said, people had such high hopes and such high expectations. They really wanted to see a Game 7 here in downtown Edmonton. I have a couple of fans here with me tonight just to debrief what happened. Nolan and Matt are here. How are you guys feeling?
We're okay right now, you know what I mean? Like, we already been here before, you know, like last year and stuff. But you know what? We never doubt our Oilers. We love them no matter what.
You're still smiling. How are you feeling?
I'm good. I still believe in the team. We got Draisaitl, and then we'll lock up McDavid soon, and then we're good. We're still good.
What do you think went wrong tonight with the game?
I think, you know, like, they have a good goalie over there, too. I'm not saying that we don't, but you know what? Like, our boys gave it all they got, and you know what? I'm still proud of them for everything they did.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I think we got out-goalied, but we had to play a really defensive team in LA. Vegas was a hard series, and Dallas is much tougher than Carolina. They had more juice, and it showed.
So you're hoping for a better season next year?
Oh, we'll have a better season, I know.
Sure,
They'll have so much fire. McDavid's going to have so much momentum coming in. I know they will.
Well, thank you both so much for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Go Oilers. Let's go.
Some sad but not completely dejected Edmonton Oilers fans downtown tonight, Ian.
Yeah, good for you, Madeline, that you found a couple of people not only willing to stay and talk to you, but also willing to talk about next year. The problem, Mark Connolly, is that next year comes so soon. Free agent decisions have to be made in a couple of weeks' time. And could you imagine how hard it's going to be for these Oilers to get motivated for an exhibition game in mid-September and the regular season in October?
Well, that fan referenced it. They have to sign McDavid in the offseason because he's eligible for an extension, right? So he's under contract for next year. Fine. You want to sign him to a long-term deal, lock him down. They'll have those two for a long time if McDavid signs, as we think he will, Draisaitl. So that's the basis of a great team, just those two players, right? But there's lots of holes to fill. There's lots of decisions to make about players who are on expiring contracts. Bouchard, their top offensive defenseman, they think he's coming in for a $10 million a year payday. You've got to manage all that under the salary cap. You've got to decide who's coming back and who's not, and who's available at free agency that you want to jump on.
Yeah, and for those of you watching in Nova Scotia saying, hey, wait a sec, there was another team here, and the other team had a lot of great players on it, like Brad Marchand.
Yes.
Let's finish by talking about that, because
sure.
The Florida Panthers have won 2 Stanley Cups in a row, and they earned this win.
Absolutely, they did, and they've proven that they are better than the Oilers in pretty much every aspect of the game. Brad Marchand coming over from the Boston Bruins at the trade deadline is a great pickup for Florida. It proved to be, everybody was kind of like, well, sure, he's an older player. What is he going to add? He's playing on the third line. He scored some key goals, and he looked really good. Next year when he's playing for Canada at the Olympics, which is a possibility, so will this guy be, Connor McDavid, Canadians can pull together and cheer for Brad Marchand. But I know Oiler fans won't be happy about that. Probably Vancouver Canuck fans,
yes.
As you may count yourself. Not big happy guy about Marchand either, but they have a tremendous team. Weber wins the Conn Smythe. He was fantastic. That sticks in the Oilers fans' craw too because he's a former Flame. But just a tremendous player in the playoffs. Clutch. So many clutch players on that team. That's why they won back-to-back Stanley Cups. They just have so much talent and so much grit. They just smothered the Oilers so many times in this series, and the Oilers could not crawl out of it. You got to give them full credit. 2 Stanley Cups in a row.
Absolutely, and the players get to write the story here. We don't, but the perfect ending for a lot of us would have been not only an Edmonton Oilers win tonight and on Friday, but also to cap the final broadcast year of Mark Connolly. You are retiring after a terrific career in July. Mark, it's been great working with you tonight, but at different times throughout your career, so thank you very much.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Ian.
For now, it's back to Adrian in Banff.
That's Ian from the Ice District in Edmonton tonight. Thank you. Well, we have a lot more still ahead tonight on the National, including a new warning and a new appeal aimed at saving lives.
It's the #1 cancer killer for men, and it soon will also be for women.
The push to lower the age for colorectal cancer screening. We're back in 2. Obviously, another beautiful night in Banff, Alberta, as this week's G7 summit comes to a close after a string of high-stakes meetings, promises, and one surprise exit. We've got more on everything that unfolded in just a bit. Well, Ontario Premier Doug Ford says masked man tried to steal a vehicle from his home overnight. He told the story at a press conference this morning after criticizing the bail system.
4 thugs come racing down my street, masks on, ready to take the car out of the driveway. Surprise, surprise, at 12:30, the 2 police cars are there. The chase is on.
Okay, so that chase worked out for Toronto police. They nabbed 2 men and 2 teenagers and laid a series of charges, including possessing an electronic device for vehicle theft. There are calls tonight to help catch a preventable disease sooner. Colorectal cancer is often treatable, especially when it's caught in the early stages. Yet in Canada, it remains the second deadliest due to delays in detection. Christine Birak looks at new calls to lower the screening age.
It was within a month.
Their stories are unnerving.
There was dark blood in the stool.
Young, seemingly healthy, and yet close to death.
We knew that there was a colon cancer happening, but when he said stage 4, my mind went blank. Like, I couldn't process words, I couldn't process thoughts.
Quick to start getting
Colorectal Cancer Canada says it's not clear why the disease is rising in people under 50, but this ad they're filming will push to change the screening age.
We are advocating that it be lowered to start the screening at 45 years old.
In most of the country, the recommended screening age is 50. Lowering it could come at a cost.
An investment does have to be made, and about 1 million more fit tests will have to be done, and perhaps maybe another 500,000 colonoscopies will have to be done.
Simply poke it into the stool?
Fit tests are stool sample kits gathered by patients. They're inexpensive, but if they flag an issue, a colonoscopy is needed.
Do we have the resources and the capacity to take on additional colonoscopies?
This study, Screening Age with Cancer Incidence, Mortality and Costs, used modeling to predict the impacts of early colorectal cancer screening. It suggests screening at age 45 could lead to approximately 12,000 fewer colorectal cancer cases and about 5,200 fewer deaths over a 40-year period, concluding lowering the screening age may be justified, but evaluation of colonoscopy capacity is necessary.
Adding this additional work onto what colonoscopists are already doing is what one of the concerns is.
Still, he thinks screening younger people would be beneficial. More countries, including the UK, are considering a similar shift. However, the vast majority of colorectal cancer cases are in older adults. Even with screening available, up to 40% of them aren't using it. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
Now it's time to break down the stories shaping our world, starting with the consequential G7 meetings here in Alberta. Even with a shorter than expected stay, Donald Trump commanded most of the attention. But for first-time host Mark Carney, Trump was just one of many leaders to greet, just one of several relationships to nurture.
We've got a bit more work to do, so we'll go do it over dinner.
All right, so let's break that down with Katie Simpson and Murray Brewster, thank you, who are here with us tonight. Katie, what did Mark Carney need to accomplish here?
The simple answer is do no harm and really make sure that he doesn't have additional challenges to deal with that he didn't have before the summit started. And there's a couple of lenses you can sort of look at that through. So from the Canada-US perspective, are there new problems that Mark Carney needs to deal with? Not that we're aware of. They have this new 30-day deadline meant to sort of spark those conversations along. So that seems to be moving along okay. It doesn't seem there's any new fresh harm there. But then when you take a step back and look at the broader aspect of this summit, is there harm in the fact that these G7 leaders couldn't come together on some of the most critical issues that are affecting the world right now?
Okay, so why don't we take a look at some of the things the Prime Minister's office has said that Canada accomplished here. So we are looking at a discussion about critical minerals and AI, that was with the French president, a plan to sign a shared security agreement with the Japanese Prime Minister, discussion to expand the Canada-EU free trade relationship, and $4.3 billion in support for Ukraine. So, Murray, can we pick up on the Ukraine funding there and Carney's meeting with President Zelensky? How significant is that amount of money?
Well, $4.3 billion is nothing to sneeze at. And we've got the normal military funding, but we also have something interesting in the sense that the Ukrainians are now going to get a $2.3 billion loan using the interest from frozen Russian assets. More sanctions, which is what Volodymyr Zelensky was asking for when he came here earlier today. But significantly, and this is the part that jumped out at me, was the attempt to sanction Russia's shadow tanker fleet. That's very significant because it is becoming a major concern for the Europeans who have been talking about possibly seizing those vessels. And so the other aspect to the Ukraine relationship was they were looking for some kind of consensus for a strong statement. And the Prime Minister, during his news conference, danced around that. And, there was suggestions that the U.S. watered down the attempts, and they put it in the chair, but there was no separate statement for Ukraine, which is significant, and I'm sure it's something the Ukrainians are going to notice.
Absolutely. In terms of the United States, Katie, the big announcement here, right, is this 30-day deadline to reach a trade and security deal. Mark Carney said tonight that having a deadline is helpful to focus negotiations. You have covered a lot of trade negotiations. Is that deadline a real thing?
So what Mark Carney said tonight is very much in line with what we reported earlier today. And the sources have told myself, as well as my colleagues at Radio Canada, that the Canadians want this 30-day deadline as a way to sort of try to force the Americans to get serious about the negotiations. What we are hearing is that the Canadians, and this is according to senior Canadian government sources, is that the Canadians are coming to the table. They're making these specific offers with specific proposals. They are generally received well by the Americans, but that the Americans aren't sort of responding in kind. They're not coming back with their own proposals. And so the Canadians really want to try and force things, put a sense of urgency in there. And with this make or break deadline for this, they hope it can sort of jumpstart things to get toward a finish line.
Okay, well, I mean, we'll see on that. At the very end of the closing news conference, Mark Carney sort of held the room of reporters back a little bit to add a thought, I suppose a bit of a defense of the G7. We have that one. We take a listen.
There is a great amount of direct dialogue and discussion, very frank exchanges, very strategic exchanges, differences of opinion on a number of issues, but from an effort to find common solutions to some of these problems. And that is particularly valuable, in my opinion.
So he added something interesting there, that multilateralism is under great strain, if you will. So Murray, curious, as the United States sort of recedes in a way, is the G7 and I suppose other bodies like it more important to other countries?
Well, G7 is under strain. There's the United States only stuck around for half of the summit, and multilateralism is not dead. It is under strain, but multilateralism only works if the United States is rowing with its allies at the same time, and perhaps not even rowing against it. So this is the thing I think that we all have to watch coming out of this particular summit, is how the allied nations get together, perhaps in smaller groups, and try to move the ball forward on key issues such as Ukraine. How much progress they're going to make without the backing of the United States is really up in the air. And I mean, there have been papers and international experts who've suggested that maybe it's time to reform the G7 into something like the G6 without the United States, which is something that a lot of people, particularly in the institutions of the different governments, are opposed to. They still find that it's important to try and find common ground with the United States.
So, we have been talking about Donald Trump leaving early. What's your sense, just listening to what Murray's saying, about how important others perceive the United States to be? How important do you think Donald Trump perceives the G7 to be?
The attitude coming from the White House is it's America first, baby, and nothing else really matters. And that is the attitude that sort of shapes all of the foreign policy decisions, all of the economic divisions, and Donald Trump views himself as a disruptor. And all of this is in line with how the White House is trying to reshape the way the world works to make it more favorable for terms for America. We've seen it a lot when it comes to trade, and we're seeing it a lot now when it comes to support for institutions and you know, the United States feeling it's done too much for too long, not enough people have kept up, and they want that to change. And so all of this sort of speaks to the fact that this is a Donald Trump America First agenda. They are not apologetic for it, and they are pushing ahead and want to see further change. The question is, are these other G7 countries, all of these other countries that are allies of the United States that work together to try and row in the same direction and try to achieve common outcomes, are they going to get in line with the United States? Because they're going to row in one direction, and it's up to everyone else to get in line.
Well, they're going to have a chance to talk pretty soon, right? There's this NATO conference coming up next week. This one's done. NATO is next. After Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that Canada will meet its defense spending target soon, what do you think, Murray, we should be watching for at that NATO summit?
Well, the debate is going to be about 5%. Canada's going to come into the room and say, hey, we've made 2%. And now the benchmark is going to be 3.5 for military spending and 1.5 for defense infrastructure. So it's going to be interesting to see how that debate goes with among allies, but also among Canadian officials, because it's been a struggle to get to 2%.
Right. And now the bar is moving. All right, Murray, Katie, as always, thanks very much, you two.
Thanks.
Welcome.
All right. Still ahead, 6 weeks after 2 children vanished, still no trace, no answers, and police say no signs of abduction.
These are everybody's grandchildren. They're not just mine now.
The mystery that's left a small Nova Scotia community searching for an explanation. The mystery of 2 young Nova Scotia children missing for more than 6 weeks. After painstaking searches and hundreds of tips, still no trace.
It's the biggest search I've been involved in.
I've never seen 2 missing children go at the same time.
Officials perplexed and a community worried. Kayla Hounsell spoke with family members, the RCMP, and search crews to break down what we know so far.
Are you able to authorize and start getting some search teams going to the Gairloch location?
Radio chatter. Search crews and first responders mobilizing in a quest no one dreamed would take this long.
Just make sure Mom stays close to the house there in case they happen to sneak out and get back into the house.
A home deep in rural Nova Scotia, 140 kilometers northeast of Halifax, the last known location.
A lot of area to cover. We're out in the sticks here.
Not 1, but 2 missing children. A dog that barks at everything, a mother who left on the second day, a father who hasn't seen the kids in 3 years, and a stepfather trying to piece things together.
It's been a long 6 weeks. I know that everybody basically in the world at this point is always wanting to know like what happened.
The mystery of what happened to 6-year-old Lily Mae Sullivan and her 4-year-old brother Jack William James Sullivan is indeed gripping the country and beyond. It is Friday, May 2nd. Martel and his partner Malaya Brooks Murray, the children's mother, are having a lazy morning with their baby. Lily and Jack are in the kitchen alone.
Malaya and the baby were asleep. Lily came in multiple times. I was not in deep sleep by any means. And then about 20 minutes passed, and then when I woke up, Malaya was right beside me. She was still asleep. And I said, I don't hear Lily and Jack.
The time, no one will say for sure, but police say it was around 10 a.m. when they got a 911 call.
I ran up in the woods to the kids. They have cabins up in the woods, which only took me like 30 seconds. I came right back down. She was on the phone with the RCMP.
For 6 days, crews tackled an exhaustive search. The children's mother took the baby to be with her family in another part of the province. Her mother told CBC News the RCMP told them not to speak with news reporters. The RCMP says it just advised everyone to be mindful of the information they share publicly. On May 7th, police scaled back the search.
The probability of survival is taken into consideration.
But search crews returned for 2 more weekends until the end of May, searching wells, mine shafts, and septic systems, even flying a drone beneath the home.
The 4-year-old is wearing some blue dinosaur boots.
Police say they found a boot print. And listen to this in the radio chatter.
Families brought us to a location there, not far away, that there's a piece of a blanket.
Police won't say anything about a blanket, but Martel says a piece of Lily's blanket was found near the boot print. He says both children may have undiagnosed autism.
For a lot of people, this story just sounds odd.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand that?
Yes, I do. And I see it every day online.
He's keenly aware the public suspects him, says the police did too at the start.
Of course. The stepfather was always a prime suspect right off the beginning.
So he offered to take a polygraph test.
I was extremely nervous. Especially with the first question they asked you, did you kill Lily and Jack?
That was the first question they asked you?
Yeah. Yeah.
When did you find out the result of your test?
Immediately right after.
What did they say to you?
You did a good job, you passed.
Hi, Kayla. How you doing?
The RCMP's Corporal Guillaume Tremblay is not an investigating officer, but he speaks for the force in Nova Scotia.
You know, it's quite rare that in my career I've never seen 2 missing children go at the same time.
Was anything found in any of these searches that was deemed to be of significance? Even if you can't tell me what it was, anything of significance?
So I can tell you that the investigation's ongoing and that we haven't found any evidence to show that there was an abduction of the children.
So you don't think they were abducted, but you can't find them. How do 2 young children just vanish?
That's a great question, Kayla, and we are asking for the public for tips and information.
He says the force has received close to 500 tips, some that have taken them elsewhere in the country. But the only confirmed sighting of Jack and Lily was the day before they disappeared in Nova Scotia. Martel says the children were seen on camera with the whole family. Still, police are asking for trail camera footage in the area dating back 5 days. They say they're trying to establish a timeline in the lead up to the disappearance.
So when teams are tasked, they get a bearing.
Crews have searched around 8.5 square kilometers.
Coming up through all of this stuff.
Amy Hansen has been the search manager for most of that. She's taking us into the woods to show us what her team has been dealing with.
The vast majority of it was probably from Fiona.
Downed trees from post-tropical storm Fiona 3 years ago.
This is actually fairly mild compared to some of the areas.
Over a total of 10 days, they searched for 12,000 hours.
It's pretty much unheard of in this province. It's the biggest search I've been involved in.
And she's been at this 22 years.
Do you think those kids are in the woods?
From everything I've seen, yes.
Why can't you find them?
They're small, they'd be hiding. They would have crawled underneath something probably when they got tired. They could have gone further than what we searched. There's all kinds of scenarios, unfortunately.
And that's playing heavily on the mind of this woman, Lily and Jack's paternal grandmother.
Their smiles are just beautiful.
She hadn't seen the children in nearly 2 years, a relationship left complicated after her son, their biological father, chose to stay out of their lives. She says he has been questioned by police 3 times.
A couple of days ago, they had contact and they told him that they weren't looking his way anymore, that everything was fine.
She says she joined the search herself as soon as she heard Lily and Jack were missing. She doesn't believe the children are in the woods.
There's no reason for any child to wander deep into the woods. There's just not.
The brush is just too thick.
It is way too thick. Way too thick.
Tonight is about saying a prayer.
She attended a vigil in Pictou County marking 1 month since the children went missing and says she feels the support of the community and beyond.
Well, these are everybody's grandchildren. They're not just mine now.
As she clings to cherished keepsakes,
this is Lily's handprint.
She is pleading for any information that could provide answers.
There is nothing more pure and innocent than a 6 and a 4-year-old. And they deserve so much better than what they got.
She keeps her mind occupied spending time in the garden, surrounded by hummingbirds. Symbols of hope, though she admits now that so much time has passed, she doesn't have much hope the children will be found alive, and even worries the mystery of what happened to them may never be solved.
Up next, a diving exhibition takes a romantic turn.
Nothing was really going through my mind at that moment. I completely forgot how to dive. I went into shock, in the best way, of course.
Their underwater engagement in our moment. You are looking at a BC couple captured here as they got engaged in a pretty elaborate underwater scene during an expedition off the Galapagos Islands. So after knowing each other for 8 years, they decided, okay, the time is right to take their relationship to new depths, as it were. And tonight, their unforgettable dive is our moment.
Our first date was actually a dive. I never really stopped diving together after that.
The underwater world is a big, vast area, and you never know which direction you're going to kind of go. There happened to be a big turtle that was pretty much stationed right over top of the treasure chest, and that's what she noticed and went to first, and then the turtle moved and it revealed the chest. She pulled it out, and I encouraged her to open it up, and it was pictures from us traveling through the many years, and then there was a little message in a bottle and the ring.
Nothing was really going through my mind at that moment. I completely forgot how to dive. I went into shock, in the best way, of course. My mask started filling up with tears. I kept having to clear it, actually. And yeah, it was just a beautiful moment.
She kind of went into full-on tears and nodded yes. And yeah, it's pretty special.
I'm gonna cry. Oh.
Okay, well, now the bar has been raised for absolutely everybody. That, by the way, took almost a year and a half to plan, so congratulations, you two. From all of us at the National here in Banff, our folks all across Canada and the rest of the world, thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.